the young and the restless spoilers. The entanglement between Claire and Holden had always carried the weight of an unsolved mystery in Genoa City, a puzzle that refused to yield its full picture no matter how many times Kyle tried to piece it together. To him, Claire was the woman he was ready to bind his future to, someone who had entered his life with a mixture of passion, charm, and carefully constructed fragility. Yet in her silences and evasions lay cracks that he could never quite ignore. She would meet Holden in secluded places, often with hushed tones and an urgency that suggested their conversations carried more than casual words or distant ties. Kyle, driven by love but unsettled by intuition, pressed her on countless occasions, asking why she often disappeared into shadows or why her phone lit up late at night with messages she would hurriedly dismiss. But every time she would brush him off with half answers or deflections. He told himself that love meant trust, but in his heart he also knew trust could only survive when honesty was present. And with Claire, that honesty seemed like a luxury she refused to grant. The secrecy became unbearable, and with their engagement looming, Kyle knew he had to resolve this haunting question before binding himself to someone who might already be deceiving him. Unbeknownst to Kyle, the very foundation of Claire's carefully curated identity was a web of half-truths and calculated omissions. Holden, a figure she had attempted to tuck away in the recesses of her past, was not just some acquaintance or fleeting connection. He was her husband. Years earlier, under circumstances that Claire had never fully confronted, she had married Holden and borne his child, a truth that tethered them together permanently no matter how far she tried to run. What complicated matters further was that Holden had grown weary of existing in the shadows, watching Claire parade around Genoa City with Kyle, watching her wear an engagement ring that symbolized a life she was never free to give, ignited something dark within him. The bitterness of being dismissed, the jealousy of another man claiming the woman he once called his wife, and the fear that their child would be erased from her narrative fueled Holden's determination to bring the truth out into the open. He demanded that Claire end the charade, confess the reality of their marriage and their child, and stop weaving a future that was built on a lie. In his mind, Kyle deserved to know the truth, even if it destroyed Claire's carefully constructed world. For Claire, this confrontation was a nightmare taking shape. She had convinced herself that what Genoa City did not know could not hurt her, that she could step into a new life with Kyle and leave behind the threads of the one she had with Holden. But Holden's persistence chipped away at her defenses. Each meeting between them grew more intense, more fraught with the weight of inevitability. Holden was no longer a man begging her to choose loyalty. He was now a storm that threatened to expose everything she had tried to hide. And as much as Claire wanted to bury the truth, she could see the righteousness in Holden's anger, the raw ache of a man watching the woman he loved erase him from her story, and the silent pain of a child growing up without recognition of a family that still technically existed. Yet, fear of losing Kylie and everything that came with his name, his family's influence, and the stability of a future she believed she deserved kept her paralyzed. The duality of her life was becoming too heavy to carry, but still she clung to the hope that secrets could remain buried if she only willed them hard enough. That hope shattered the moment Kyle, suspicious and unwilling to let doubts consume him anymore, decided to follow Claire. One evening, driven by the nagging sense that the truth was waiting just beyond his reach, he lingered near one of her clandestine meetings with Holden. The hushed tones that drifted through the air seemed unremarkable at first, but then the words became sharper, clearer, and devastatingly undeniable. Kyle listened in disbelief as Holden confronted Claire, demanding she stop lying, insisting she admit that she was already his wife and that they shared a child together. Every syllable hammered into Kyle's chest like a blow, unraveling the fabric of trust and affection he had woven around Claire. It was not just a matter of deceit about past relationships. It was the deliberate concealment of a marriage, of a child, of an entire life that she had never allowed him to glimpse. To Kyle, it was not just betrayal, it was annihilation of the foundation on which he had planned to build their future. Standing in the shadows, hearing Claire's silence, her half-hearted attempts to deflect Holden's accusations, Kyle felt his world fracture. The woman he had loved, the woman he was preparing to marry, was revealed to be someone entirely different, someone capable of weaving lies so intricate they bordered on cruelty. His mind raced with disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. How could she look into his eyes every day and promise forever when she had already sworn vows to another man? How could she let him plan a life together while hiding the existence of a child? A truth so monumental it could redefine everything he thought he knew about her character. The betrayal cut deeper than any business rivalry, any family feud, any misunderstanding. Was the personal kind of betrayal that stripped a man of his trust in his own judgment. In that moment, Kyle knew that his life had been hijacked by a lie, and the woman he believed he knew was a stranger. The days following his discovery were some of the darkest Kyle had endured. He wrestled with how to confront Claire, whether to unleash his fury in an instant or to let her incriminate herself by pretending he was still blind to the truth. The thought of their engagement party, the family's gathering, the smiles that would mask a ticking time bomb, tormented him. How long could he pretend to be a groom in love when his fiancée was entangled in such deceit? His mind rehearsed every possible scenario, exposing her in front of everyone to shame her, demanding answers in private and watching her crumble, or walking away silently to preserve some dignity. Yet every option carried consequences, not only for him, but for his family and for the reputations intertwined with the Newman and Abbott legacies. The scandal of being duped by Claire would ripple through Genoa City, feeding the whispers of enemies and emboldening those who already questioned his judgment. And yet, the alternative of her and living under the shadow of her deception was unbearable. For Claire, the walls were closing in quickly. She sensed a shift in Kyle's demeanor, the distance in his gaze, the subtle coldness in his tone. She suspected he had learned something, but clung to the fragile possibility that he did not know everything. Holden, meanwhile, grew increasingly relentless, convinced that Kyle's ignorance would soon be obliterated anyway, and that his own intervention was necessary to reclaim what was rightfully his. The tension between the three of them became an invisible battlefield. Each step Claire took toward her wedding felt like marching deeper into a trap she could not escape. Her lies had carried her this far, but now they were collapsing, and the only question that remained was whether she would confess before Kyle destroyed her with the truth he already carried. Kyle's decision loomed like a storm on the horizon. He could choose vengeance, stripping Claire of her dignity by exposing her in front of everyone who mattered, or he could choose silence, walking away and letting her drown in the ruins of her own lies without lifting a hand. Both paths would hurt, but one might at least salvage a shred of his pride, while the other promised spectacle and humiliation. As the weight of betrayal pressed on him, he realized this was more than just about love lost. It was about reclaiming his sense of self, about proving to himself and to the world that he could not be fooled again. Claire's deception had forced him into a crucible of pain, but it would also forge the steel he needed to rise above the shame. Whether he would destroy her publicly or leave her to her private wreckage, one thing was certain: the marriage she had envisioned would never happen, because Kyle could never again look at her without seeing the stranger who had lied to him about everything. Kyle was not the kind of man to let his emotions dictate the course of his actions, at least not when the stakes were this high. What he had overheard between Claire and Holden had shattered his heart, yes, but beneath the wreckage of betrayal burned a sharp and calculated fury that made him more dangerous than either of them could ever imagine. He could have confronted Claire on the spot, demanded the truth, and exposed her duplicity. But what good would that have done other than giving her a chance to spin the story, to weave her deceit into yet another layer of manipulation? Kyle knew better. If Claire had the audacity to hide a marriage, a child, and a conspiracy from him, she was not the type to collapse at a confrontation. She was the type to adapt, to twist, to fight back. And so, Kyle chose patience. He chose silence. He chose the quiet path of vengeance, where every move would be carefully designed every step drawing Claire and Holden deeper into the snare he was constructing. He would not allow them to know he had discovered the truth until the moment it served him most. Holden, on the other hand, was Claire's greatest liability. His jealousy, his anger, and his unwillingness to play the long game made him reckless. He demanded recognition, demanded Claire stop her engagement with Kyle, and with each demand he undermined her carefully orchestrated plan. For Holden, this was personal, about reclaiming his wife, about protecting his son, about ensuring he was not erased. For Claire, it was strategic. Her sights were not on Holden's bruised ego, but on Abbott, the Abbott family's crown jewel, the company she knew would give her power, money, and a place in Genoa City that could not be challenged. Marrying Kyle meant more than love or partnership. It was the key to control. With Kyle as her husband, she would eventually secure influence within Abbott, and with Holden at her side as her silent ally. She believed they could manipulate and dismantle the Abbott stronghold from within. But Holden's temper, his refusal to stay quiet, and his jealousy threatened to destroy everything before it even began. Claire's plan was bold, but far from flawless. She had underestimated the Abbott family's intuition. Diane, who had clawed her way back into Kyle's life after years of mistrust and manipulation, recognized the patterns in Claire almost immediately. Diane knew what it looked like when someone spun lies to keep themselves afloat, because she had done it herself too many times before. Claire's too-perfect demeanor, her practiced smiles, her vague answers about her past, they all rang alarm bells for Diane, who had quietly voiced her concerns to Jack more than once. Jack, protective of Kyle, but wary of overstepping, listened carefully. Though he wanted his son to be happy, he also knew that the Abbott legacy had always been a target, and the timing of Claire's entrance into Kyle's life was suspiciously convenient. Between the two of them, Claire had never won their full trust, and that distrust meant Kyle would not stand alone when the truth finally came crashing down. Kyle's strategy was to use that distrust to his advantage. He began piecing together evidence, pulling strings quietly, ensuring that when Claire's mask finally slipped, there would be no way for her to recover. He knew Holden was the weak link, so he planted subtle seeds, letting Holden believe that perhaps Kyle was still oblivious, still blind, encouraging his recklessness until it would inevitably lead to a mistake. At the same time, Kyle tightened his own guard around Abbott, reinforcing protections, monitoring transactions, and keeping a closer eye on company operations than ever before. If Claire and Holden truly believed they could infiltrate the company and seize control, they would soon discover just how wrong they were. The question of when Claire's plan would collapse was no longer a matter of chance, it was a matter of Kyle's timing. He could let her get closer, let her believe she was winning, and then rip everything away at the last possible moment. That would be the deepest cut, the one that left her not only without Abbott, but also without dignity. And as for Holden, his impatience made him easy to manipulate. Kyle only had to wait for him to make a move that would expose them both. Claire's desperation to succeed might lead her to use her son as leverage, perhaps even taking him to Nice, where she believed distance and new surroundings would shield her from scrutiny. But that, too, would play into Kyle's hands. If she tried to move her son out of Genoa City, the act itself would raise questions, stir gossip, and force her into the spotlight she had worked so hard to avoid. Every lie she told would unravel faster under the weight of public attention, and Kyle was prepared to make sure that happened. For Diane and Jack, the stakes were just as high. Abbott had been under siege from rivals countless times before, and both knew how dangerous it was to let outsiders close to the family. Diane's instincts told her that Claire was after more than Kyle's heart, and Jack's cautious nature reinforced the suspicion that the company was in jeopardy. Together, they began quietly gathering their own evidence, not wanting to confront Kyle directly, but ready to step in when the moment came. In their minds, the failure of Claire's plan was inevitable. It was only a matter of whether Kyle would be hurt beyond repair before the truth surfaced. Holden's growing frustration, Claire's tightening desperation, and Kyle's quiet determination formed a volatile triangle that could not hold forever. Claire might attempt to escape with her son to Nice, believing that distance would buy her more time, but running would only prove her guilt. The very act of leaving would show Kyle, the Abbotts, and even Holden himself that her empire of lies had reached its breaking point. And when that point came, Claire would discover that the silence she mistook for ignorance was in fact the calm before the storm of Kyle's revenge.